All right, so now we're jumping into a different hazard, which is the chemical hazards and controls. And hopefully you can guess what this chemical hazards and controls portion is going to talk about. For the majority of the time, we are facing one in particular chemical hazard. Can you guys guess what it is? All right, so we got chemicals used in food processing. At the point of use, you got the different areas where we basically have these types of chemicals introduced, and it's just a breakdown. Once again, looking at it from, we're always looking from farm to table. So, raising livestock, you got the growth of human. Can't talk right now. You got the growth of hormones and antibiotics. With growing of crops, you have the pesticides, herbicides, and defoliants that we place on the crops themselves. In production, you got the additives, food additives, and processing aids. Within the facility itself, using thinking about the equipment and stuff that we use to process the food, you have lubricants and paints. Or paints, it's basically just the exterior, right, the ceilings and stuff like that. And then facility sanitation, you got, of course, cleaners and sanitizers and different kinds of pesticides. And we'll get into each one of these. Hopefully, you've already been familiar with some of these. I know one thing I think about most frequently are the sanitizers. We've got a lot of leave-on sanitation or leave-on sanitizers out there right now. And, it's very important that everybody understands what that means and what that entails, and why it's considered leave on, if it is. So the different kind of chemical hazards, what are they? So the hazards may depend on the type of exposure, whether you have a long-term or short-term effect. It's based on toxicological studies, and then the law and regulations are designed to basically ensure that the exposure levels are safe within the chemicals that are properly used. So the regulations state that foods are safe and free of adulterants, and so in order to do that, we have to make sure that the chemicals that we use do not impede on this regulation, of course. And so the FDA, EPA, USDA, they all enforce some type of provision around this law, supporting this law in manufacturing or just in the food industry, in the process, once again, from farm to table anyway. So what is considered adulterant? So this definition here comes from the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. If it bears or contains any poisonous substance which may render it injurious to health, or if it bears contains added poisonous or deleterious substance. So very simple. If it contains anything that's poisonous, then it's adulterant. If it contains injuries to health, it's adulterant. And one of the good definitions that I remember early on in my career was essentially, if it's not supposed to be in the product, then it has some form of adulteration in there. Naturally occurring substances. So you got in plants, you got mushrooms, and animals, you got shellfish, and then in micro, you have molds and bacteria. So these occur naturally in these different areas of life, right? So unavoidable poisonous and deleterious substances. You got substances that are necessary in the production of food or can't be avoided with the GMP. And so when you have these, you have to have certain tolerances or action levels for specific commodity. So aflatoxin is one of them, and the action level in the foods is, for instance, 20 parts per billion. So once again, when we start talking about those raw material certificate of analysis and the checking of that kind of stuff, this is where this comes into play once again, right? Like not only from a micro standpoint, from a chemical standpoint as well. If you have any products that have inherent toxicity levels or inherent micro levels of some sort, we need to make sure that every batch is tested and we understand what that risk is with those batches. If it comes in outside of our limits, then we've got to put it on hold and ship it back. So toxins of micro origin include histamine or toxin, so the growth of bacteria in certain fish due to temperature abuse. Then you got bacterial enzymes that react with free histidine in fish. So mycotoxins is another one, which is an aflatoxin from mold growth in grains, nuts, and other products. Allergens. So this is the big one I was referring to, and I think hopefully everybody's already at this point been exposed to allergens of some sort, either by you personally having one and avoiding a certain type of food your entire life, or you having a loved one and protecting them from the same. Allergens are proteins that induce an allergic reaction, and symptoms range from mild rashes to death. 1 to 2% of adults have a food allergy, and 5 to 6% of children have a food allergy of some sort. So these are the top 8 food allergens. There are more than these, but these carry the majority of the weight when you start talking about allergens. They are peanuts, tree nuts, soybeans, and wheat, milk, egg, fish, and crustaceans. Allergens and food safety. So the major concern is producing a product that contains an undeclared allergen. Peanuts and peanut butter versus undeclared peanut and chili, right? And so when you start talking about that, what are you talking about exactly? So there are 2 different ways that this can happen. Obviously, one way is you're producing food and you have cross contact, and you're making, undeclared. You're making peanut butter or peanut product on one line, and you're making chili for some reason on another line, and they cross over, in a production area somewhere, and somehow the peanut butter was produced over this chili line, and a piece of it dropped in chili. Well, now you have peanut and allergen inside of chili, which is not declared for that allergen, right? So now you got product that was incorrectly produced or packaged into this pack. And on the nutrition facts, obviously it doesn't say it has any peanuts in it. It doesn't say it has any it doesn't declare any allergens, and it's because usually it doesn't, right? The other one is when you have the packaging incorrect. So you have the chili that you made and everything's good, and maybe it has peanuts in it, for instance, right? So say the chili has, somebody whipped something up and they said, "Oh, this is good. I gotta put these peanuts in this chili." It blows up over social media, whatever, and you start producing it and change up the formula, so it's got peanuts in it, but you never updated the packaging. Packaging didn't come through all the way. And for the last week and a half, we've been running with the old package that doesn't declare the peanut as an allergen. So, yeah, you got peanuts in the chili. It's just that it doesn't stay on the outside and on the packaging, and so our consumer doesn't know what they're consuming, right? So there's 2 different issues when you have the wrong product inside the right package, or you have the right package and the right product inside the wrong package. Chemical sensitivity. So a small percentage of the population is sensitive to certain chemicals, including sulfites, FD and C, yellow, number 5 in foods, etc. And this control is similar to the way that we control our allergens. So, as you know, throughout the process, somewhere, some way, we intentionally add chemicals, and so the question is, what do we do, right? Well, we got to make sure it's under those levels. So it's safe when used appropriately, but can be hazardous if improperly used. That includes pesticides, fertilizers, antibiotics, preservatives, you name it, right? Regulations can control the level of use and the maximum allowable residues of certain chemical in food. She talking about antibiotics and hormones. That's an example of ways to control the chemicals, but recognizing that we do need them. And so the FDA, USDA, APHIS, and FSIS, they all do a good job in managing this. And if used appropriately, they pose no health risk to the consumer. One example is that is milk. We got to make sure that, obviously it's preserved some way, kind of way, pasteurized, and then, we to consume. I myself am lactose intolerant, so I don't really experience that, but I do know it exists. Pesticide chemicals regulated by the EPA or Environmental Protection Agency. Um, and if used appropriately, the pesticide chemicals pose no health risk, and they keep us, from eating or consuming turds. Or that was graphic. I'm sorry. They stop us, but they do. Like pesticides stop us from consuming all kind of crap that is in product that could have made it had we not used the pesticides, or bugs and stuff like that. So pesticides is one way to prevent us from consuming that kind of stuff, but we got to manage the way that we do it. We have to manage the residual of the pesticide use, and hopefully we're using the number one way to remove that kind of stuff from our product, which is proper cleaning. Then you got lubricants and sanitizers. Now, they pose no hazard when used in accordance with the GMPs. Food grade lubricants can be used wherever possible. Contact with food contact surfaces and stuff like that, because it's already been approved. If it is not a food grade lubricant, it may not be used inside, for instance, a conveyor line or something like that, because it's not approved, and it's chances are it's going to leak at some point, and you won't get notified until it's already in a package or consumers already opened it up and experienced it. SSOPs, or sanitation standard operating procedures, ensure residues of sanitizers pose no hazard. Now we're going to talk about the control of these chemical hazards. When you talk about allergen control, the proper use is labeling, because we kind of talked about a little bit earlier. Careful control of product labeling, formulation control, and ingredient specs and supply control are very important pieces of the quality and food safety team. This is a exhaustive process and redundant process for a reason. And so, making sure that you respect that. When I say you, I mean everyone respects the level of attention and detail that goes into it. I've seen it time and time again with my own eyes. Production wants to run, and we want to run as well. But as a leader in food safety and quality, wherever you may be, whether it may be logistics, operations, maintenance, obviously, food safety and quality, you want to make sure that you have that food safety hat on, and you don't put production over something like food safety, and making sure that the product is labeled properly, the nutrition facts is on there correctly, the ingredient specs state what they're supposed to state, that kind of thing. You don't want to sacrifice, the confidence in giving the product the right product and having it labeled correctly for a couple more pounds, 30 minutes or more run time, and etc. Recognizing inadvertent cross contact. So the results of environmental exposure is one of these, right? During the process of handling, you got ineffective cleaning or dust aerosols containing the allergen. You have multiple foods produced in the same facility. It's kind of what we're talking about. You use the same processing line. You misuse, rework. I've seen, it where conveyors cross over each other in one particular, processing area. These is a ton of different ways that you can generate cross contact, cross contamination within your product, within your system. You have to make sure that your hazard analysis calls those out, and the sanitation procedures call those out, that your training calls it out, that your operation supervisors call that out, and they are aware. All your employees are aware. It really takes a team effort to recognize these cross contact risks within the plant, so that everyone's on board when they're doing it. I mean, all the way down to, if got maintenance at one point in time, they had totally different tools for a peanut butter line, and I've seen it in multiple plants before. But that's just to, whenever I'm working on this line, I gotta use these tools, no other tools, because if think about it, you use peanut butter on one line, you get the residual of the peanut butter, then you move to the other line. Well, now that other line has chances for residual peanut butter, right? So There are a lot of different ways to mitigate those risks, but before you can mitigate the risks, you have to recognize them. Control measures for inadvertent allergens. So to minimize cross contact, here's some of the issues, kind of the solutions that we just talked about. So separating storage, appropriate scheduling of production. So what does that mean? 1 week I'm going to run just one product that doesn't have any tree nuts in it at all, and then the second week I'll run it with the tree nuts, right? And so that in between that on the weekend I'll have a clean break. We'll inspect before we run, and things are going to go as planned. Careful and thorough cleaning, controlling traffic patterns, design of equipment and systems, adequate training of employees. These are all different ways that you can minimize a cross contact. But the number one way is just to not have, different products with different allergens in a particular room or what have you. That is elimination is always going to be the best way. But once you do have it and you can't eliminate it, now you got to manage it in these different ways. Chemical control program prior to receipt. So suppliers can help reduce the occurrence of potential chemical hazards. That includes having the pesticide residues on the products, including the vegetables and fruits and things of that nature further upstream at the farm. You got mycotoxins in food. You got toxic chemicals and packaging materials as well. So how can we do that? We got to develop specifications for ingredients, packing materials, and chemicals, like we talked about, the COA or certificate of analysis. You got to qualify suppliers and audit operations. So not only do we pick them, but we have to qualify them and say, hey, yep, I'm ready to do business with you because you check out for some, and we have third-party audit ability of that, right? So if you're a manufacturing facility, then you have a third-party, ability to go and audit, your suppliers and put them on a list. That's how you get them on the approved suppliers list. Obtain letters of guarantee or certificates of analysis that, once again, talk about or specifically call out those risks. Inspecting vehicles prior to unloading, inspecting materials products prior to unloading and using, periodic sampling and testing, verifying the presence of the certificate of analysis where applicable. These are all different things you can do upon receipt, as soon as you receive that product, because that's the best way to do it, the best time to do it. Once you receive it, there's really no chance, there's no telling when it's going to be used. I mean, you can manage it electronically. You can manage the location of the product manually. Doesn't matter what you do. At some point in time, if you don't handle it right then and there, you run the risk of losing sight of it. So establishment operations, that includes ensuring that only approved chemicals are used at the facility, designating responsibility for chemical receipt, storage, and use, establishing programs for controlling chemicals at the point of use, and an audit to ensure that adequate control of chemicals are happening. Chemical use and processing. So only use approved chemicals. So there's an approved chemical list. That means if I'm walking down the production floor or I'm walking in an area where food is being used, I need to make sure all bottles, all containers, all buckets are labeled. If they are not labeled properly, you have the right or the duty, I would say, to discard that chemical, because nobody knows or remember. You don't want to lean on people's memory to know what to use and what to do, right? You're talking about chemicals, you're talking about things that could possibly harm people. And so if used the wrong way, there's a lot of clear chemicals out there. There's a lot of chemicals with the same or similar color hue, right? And so whenever we come across that kind of stuff, we gotta address it right away and take the necessary precaution. Cleaning and sanitizing procedures must prevent harmful levels of residues in food contact surfaces. What that means is if there's a food contact surface there, then you need to know what that ratio is from water to chemical, and you are verifying that that ratio is being applied appropriately, because there are a lot of systems out there by Ecolab and all these other names, all these other businesses that that do the work for you. They mix the chemicals for you. However, you got to go back behind them and check it, because I forget the term for the orifice, right? The orifice is supposed to make sure that you got the right ratio, but sometimes they're wrong, sometimes they're faulty, sometimes they break, and so it's very, very, very important for you to make sure that those levels are correct on a regular basis. Storage of chemicals. So making sure that the chemicals are stored tightly in sealed containers. They are in the right temperatures. They don't pose hazardous ways. They're physically separated. They're locked. You know, all that kind of stuff. You just got to make sure things are stored properly. You covering your packaging materials such that the storage of chemicals don't spill over into your packaging materials without you knowing. When it comes to pesticide usage, it should be kept on file, um, kept on file, and the labels kept on file, and you have to make sure that the usage records are always available. Limiting all poison baits to the outside of the plant. You can use it there, but it's too risky to do it on the inside. And then just in general, controlling storage. All right, so kind of sped through that a little bit, but all the key points, I'm pretty sure you review you got. But if not, let me know and we can review those once again. But right now, we're just gonna do a little fact check or study check for you, see what you've grasped so far. All lubricants and sanitizers pose some kind of harm when in food or food contact zone. Is that true or false? And then blank is a control measure for inadvertent cross contact. We'll start with the first one. So false. All lubricants and sanitizers don't pose some kind of harm when in food or food contact. We just talked about one of them being the food grade lubricants. If it's a food grade lubricant, it does not pose a harm in food contact zone. And then appropriate scheduling. That is the control measure for inadvertent allergen cross contact. And that's it for chemical hazards and controls. You got any questions?